You've started your podcast and you've been told you need to get your podcast on YouTube. Like, yes, very true. You put your podcast on YouTube and now you're just like, WTF, it's not growing. Why is it hearing crickets? I've seen these mistakes over and over with different prospects that I talk to and people in my audience, and also clients that have come to us to help us fix it. And it's the same recurring mistakes over and over and over. You fix these 5 things and you'll be golden. If you have a podcast on YouTube and you're looking to supercharge your growth, go ahead and type in podcast in the comments and let's get going. Let's talk about authority. This right here is everything. So when you're starting your podcast, if you started it or whatever, let's think about what you have under your belt, okay? What type of audience have you built prior to your podcast? If you're a true coach, consultant, expert, speaker, author, someone who really loves their craft and your heart has a message to get out there and amplify, this is crucial and absolutely step 1. And step 2 is like, okay, authority. Going back to this topic, what authority have you built? Do you have a big website? Do you have a following on any other social media platform? Are you an author? Do you have a big email list? And what I mean by this is you could either have none of those things, but the more of those things that you have, the bigger your authority is. And if your authority isn't quite that big yet, maybe, just maybe, don't get super mad when I say this, but maybe having a podcast at this moment in time isn't for you. And I say this with a lot of love, and here's what I mean. When you have a podcast and you have guests on your podcast, you are edifying them, glorifying your guests, and you're hardly talking about yourself and what you do and the services that you offer and how you can help people. And it's not impossible to grow a podcast from scratch if you don't have authority, but it's going to make it that much harder. And so what I mean is a YouTuber, let's take this person A, who's an entrepreneur, YouTuber. This person already has an established 20, 30K subs on their channel, whereas this person over here, they don't really have an audience. They're getting started from scratch. There's no following. There's no place on the internet where people can go and get nurtured by their content. It's going to be much harder for this person to build up a podcast if you're going to have podcast guests on your episodes, okay? My recommendation is to build your authority first. What this means is you're doing a solo podcast. You're creating a YouTube channel with just you so that people can learn to love you, and you're building up your personal brand. The personal brand is what's going to make the podcast. As an example, you look at the Diary of a CEO. When Steve Bartlett, when he first started his podcast, he had mega authority. He was a CEO of a lot of companies, an investor, a multi-millionaire, already had an established following. He really had a lot going for himself, which justified him starting a podcast with a bunch of guests, okay? He had the money also to hire a team of 20 to do the podcast production behind the scenes, which definitely makes it easier. And so all this to be said is, like, if your podcast is still generally new and you're still building up that authority and your personal brand and awareness and all of that, it might be a good idea to create just a YouTube channel by yourself giving value, or in the beginning of your podcast, make it just solo episodes of just you. Don't complicate it and bring in guests. And this will carry a lot of weight a lot faster. And the next mistake I see is you're not doing solo podcasts on your YouTube podcast channel. So this is important because when somebody arrives onto the podcast channel, they're like, okay, they see a bunch of faces, because most likely you're putting, your face and your guest face, or just your guest face and that's it. And the problem with that is it's like, for the audience, it's like, okay, well, whose channel is this? Especially if you have multiple guest episodes. This is really important. And so one reason why I hear creators or podcast creators specifically saying like they're not monetizing, it's not growing, is because you're not doing solo podcasts. So you don't have the chance to demonstrate your expertise and have people be like, oh, I see this person's expertise. Like, I really love their entire episode about women and hormone therapy and how to really get off that that extra body fat, etc. So the key to really growing is making sure you're incorporating those solo episodes into your podcasts. The next thing, going into some tactical things, is that your podcast or your your podcast on your YouTube channel is not speaking YouTube. It's not speaking the love language of YouTube. Let me give you an example. In the like Spotify and Apple Music and other podcast platforms where it's just audio, a lot of people, like starting with Joe Rogan, right? Everyone followed whatever Joe Rogan was doing. Joe Rogan has that annoying intro, no offense, but it's kind of like, eh. But he has that intro. And a lot of podcasts have an intro where it's like, welcome to the such and such name podcast where you're going to learn about blah. I am so-and-so, your host. And it's this long audio intro in the beginning. And that could work. And sometimes it does work on podcast platforms. But on YouTube, it's horrible. YouTube does not like that. They don't want intros that are standard in the beginning, because when a YouTube viewer and subscriber sees that or hears that, they're like, oh my gosh. How long is this intro? It's been 5 seconds. I'm leaving. So that's why your YouTube intros have to speak YouTube, okay? You have to get not professional, that's not the word. You have to get clips from your podcast, whether it's a conversation with a guest or just yourself, which are intriguing, which are thought-provoking, which are thought leadership, and combine them together in the beginning to make what's called a mashup intro. So if you look at any successful podcast channel on YouTube, they have this. It's about anywhere between 20 seconds all the way up to a minute of just mashups of the conversation, which leaves intrigue. So the podcast host might ask the guest like, hey, so-and-so, so what was it like for you when you grew up in poverty in Croatia? And then they take a random clip where it's like, you wouldn't believe I was living under a bridge and then it just pauses. And then it's like, wait, I want to hear what they have to say. Hey, so-and-so, so what was it like for you when you grew up in poverty in Croatia? You wouldn't believe I was living under a bridge. And that right there is so powerful when you're making an intro. And when you have that versus a annoying long audio, that's what's going to get people to stay, because they're going to hear this one little 5-second clip and be like, man, I'm sticking around for this podcast episode just to hear a conversation about whatever that is. So that is an example of speaking the YouTube language. The next thing is thumbnails. Your thumbnails are very, very important. Arguably the most important thing next to the title of the podcast, which extra tip, let's just call this reason, thumbnails and titles. They also very much so have to speak YouTube. They're probably not speaking YouTube right now if your podcast is not growing. So your thumbnail has to model after the high converting elements of a good thumbnail. I mean, it has to have really curiosity-based copy, no more than 4 words. Okay, stop putting 10 words on your thumbnail, trying to put the whole title on the thumbnail. Just don't do that. Okay, make sure your image is clear. Your face is, big and bright on the podcast thumbnail. Make sure your image isn't like way over here and you're dark in the shadows over here. That's not what's going on. So also titles, like you can't title it whatever you want. You definitely have to position the title for it to be a nice either keyword-based search title or a curiosity-based, high-converting title for YouTube that would spark, that includes keywords, yes, but also is like, oh, wait a minute, I need to click on this video. Let me give you an example. If you have a podcast guest that is an expert on, gut health, then you can say, let me think. Because you can, like, a transformation title is great because a lot of podcasts have episodes, whether guest or solo podcasts, about somebody who went from a transformation. So they talk about their background, their story, their hard moments, their dips, and then their triumphs. So this is a great way to position a title. It's like how so-and-so went from here to here and achieved X result. Okay, how Mary went from bankrupt to then $1 million years to now owning $1 billion company in 5 months. Or even in 5 years, not 5 months. That's crazy. But you know what I mean? Something where it's like transformational in the keyword. You are getting the information you need to see like what this episode is about. By the way, if you're getting value from this video, I invite you to download my 6-step subscribers to sales blueprint. I'll leave it right up here in a link in the description. It goes over how to streamline your whole YouTube process, systems, and workflow. So think of it as a fresh new approach to working 50% less on your YouTube channel while you systemize, monetize, and scale your channel forever with systems and team approach. So definitely grab that blueprint. It'll be right here or the first link in the description. Okay, and the next thing I wanted to mention is the podcast platforms. Utilize them to your advantage to drive more traffic to YouTube. I went and did a couple of podcast audits, like Podcast Channel, and I looked at their Spotify accounts and their other accounts on the different platforms, and I'm like, dude, bro, you're not even putting your YouTube channel link in the description of your show notes on these platforms. Like, what's going on? You know what I mean? You gotta put your YouTube channel everywhere. You gotta put it in the links and bios on your LinkedIn, your Instagrams, your podcast platforms. Like, that's just low-hanging fruit. Like, if people are going to find you through these platforms, just make sure you let them know on Spotify. Check us out on YouTube, okay? Because the more that YouTube grows, the more your platforms are going to grow, and vice versa. So if you get the YouTube podcast going, like, you are gold, because the YouTube podcast is going to grow everything else, including your socials, your email list, your clients, all of that. All right, I hope this video was helpful for you. If you love this video and are interested in knowing some really great pieces of equipment that are friendly to your budget, including things like the Shure microphone and other things that you can have streamline your workflow, definitely check out the video coming up next, all about my $1,500 YouTube studio upgrade. Just click right here and I'll see you on that video.